Hello everyone. I'm Alan. As was mentioned, co-founder of Cyferall. We're a cybersecurity company, but really focused on data protection. And just a couple of preliminary comments. I know it's just after lunch, so that's a really particularly difficult time. So for your benefit, I've removed all formulas. No mathematical formulas in my presentation, if you can believe that. It was heartbreaking, but that was important. The other thing is we're actually a post-quantum company. So you've been hearing a lot about quantum. Well, we're the step right before that. We're the post-quantum to help defend against the arrival of quantum because we're kind of imagining the darker side of quantum. I've heard a lot of presentations today about the positives of quantum, and there are certainly quite a few, and it's going to revolutionize the world. But with positives come negatives, and so we're in that post-quantum encryption world where some of the negatives, unfortunately, have to be dealt with. So moving along, there's cooperation. So I'm going to start really from the basics. Everyone here kind of knows this, but we're in this transition to a completely digital world where critical data systems are a fundamental part of our lives today. We all know that, but in that digital world, just as in the physical world, by the way, information is one of the most valuable commodities out there. And that information, unlike, again, the physical world where it took some doing to get at the data, well, it's not the case in our world. And the OECD, as a result, has identified cyber attacks as one of the 5 biggest threats. And of course, the cost is enormous. What is this digital information that is troublemaking for everyone and that is coveted by the hackers? Well, it's everything that we care about. I mean, there's really no limit to what can be hacked, what can be stolen, and the value tends to be in the eye of the beholder, as we say. So when we look at information in the digital world, we at Cyferall like to break it up into very bite-sized categories of information. And that information, that digital information, appears in 3 ways in our networks. Either you're using it, you're storing it, or it's on its way somewhere, on its way to storage, or if it's a phone call, it's on its way to a recipient. And when you look at these 3 categories, it's particularly important to look at the vulnerability of these 3 categories and to recognize that when the data is actually in use, and you've heard a lot about quantum networks, well, when you're actually using it on your device, it can't be encrypted. It has to be legible, has to be human readable, as we say. And in that case, you're in a highly vulnerable state whenever you're on your mobile phone, your PC, or any device where you're actually visualizing something that you need to understand, which is very different from information that's at rest. Information at rest, you would think it's a non-issue, it's encrypted. You don't really need to speak about it very much, but in fact, it is an issue. 50% of companies do not encrypt locally stored data. And the reason for that is very commercial, I should say. First, it's expensive, and then people are simply worried about losing the keys. It's as simple as that. It's like your house or your car. You don't want to lose those keys. It could create big issues. And then, of course, there's the urgency. If you need access to the data, you want immediate access. So why would you encrypt it? Who knows? It's a problem, which relates to this 50% unencrypted state. And then you have data in transit. And that's really what everyone seems to focus on today, and rightfully so, because that used to be the most vulnerable state. But today with SSL and TLS and VPNs, it's a non-issue. With the arrival of quantum computing, we'll talk about that in a second, it presents a new issue called store now, decrypt later as an attack. So in this particular analysis that I'm going to try to perform here, I'm looking at a subset of all digital information. I'm looking at communications. So communications, by that I mean the communications that you do every day on your phone, with your PCs, email, etc. I'm not looking at machine-to-machine communications or data analytics. I'm really looking at the information that is communicated in your everyday life, but also the data that's associated to those communications, because that data tends not to be encrypted. If you're sending an email, you're probably going to pull an attachment that is sitting around. It's part of your, let's say, your everyday life. And maybe you have 10, 20, 30, 50 files that accompany you in your everyday life, let's face it, it's not encrypted. So if I'm going to look at that analysis, again, trying to get at the vulnerability and the risks we have with quantum and others, we need to look at the communications data lifecycle. So you have basically three phases. You have a creation phase, which occurs in a device. Now we know that's unencrypted, entirely vulnerable, probably attached to files that are also unencrypted. You have a routing phase, and you have a restitution, but also called consumption, where you're actually reading what you received and using and doing something with it. In what phases is the data actually protected today? Well, clearly, while you're using it, while you're creating it, it's unprotected. While it's being routed, we know it's protected. While it's restituted, it's unprotected. This means that a large quantity of the data that is regularly used is absolutely unprotected. Now, that is a classical computing scenario, but the arrival of AI has changed that context and made it worse. Because in the past, you would have thousands and thousands of files stolen. But the issue was stealing, but then the issue was triage. How do you get at the data that's useful as a result of the theft? That's what AI changes. AI allows for targeted data theft, targeted data alteration, monitoring, and destruction. Now, quantum computing, that's the purpose of the event. That's a typo there. That 20% of protected data that I mentioned earlier, well, that 20% goes away. Quantum computing will break classical encryption. So that means that we're basically in a situation where you have 100% unprotected data. Now there's a I wouldn't call it a philosophy, but a lexicon around quantum computing. This is quantum supremacy. I think it harks back to the days of nuclear supremacy and that type of I wouldn't call it a scare tactic because it's actually scary, but those that can achieve quantum supremacy, so I think it's called a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, can do some very serious damage to the power grid, water distribution, everything that we know and that I mentioned in the very beginning in terms of our dependence on a digital life. So I like to summarize sort of these threats that are classical computing threats, AI threats, quantum computing threats in a sort of boxing analogy, if anybody here is interested in that sport, a classic 1-3 punch combination where quantum computing, in fact, does just one thing, it breaks encryption. Then AI identifies the actual target, and classical computing then does the stealing, the altering, and the destruction. Quantum computing, with the Shor algorithm and Grover's, really breaks the encryption, but you will still need classical computing and certainly AI for the next steps. So threat detection, which is performed by a lot of serious companies, is important, exceptionally important, but in fact we need 100% data protection. And that data protection needs to protect data in all forms, in all states, has to be accessible, hardware agnostic, and obviously quantum resistant. So I represent Cyferall. At Cyferall, we do exactly that. It's not a coincidence. We have zero trust and privacy by design principles that were used to create a software architecture. We have patents around an in-use form of protection based on secure enclaves and virtual machine-based architectures. We have symmetrical and asymmetrical quantum-resistant encryption. And we've bundled everything together into a software development kit that we call the CyferDome. In fact, it finally provides true end-to-end protection for the full data lifecycle. I'm going to leave you with two quotes that I think are pretty telling. There are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happen. Someone we all know. And if you don't take change by the hand, it'll take you by the throat. So communication is the sharing of information. Sharing of information is fundamental to cooperation, progress, and innovation. And if there's a disruptive change that threatens our communications, then it's vital to consider a similarly disruptive technology and innovation to restore the balance. Thank you. I'm Alain. Cyferall, where we secure data now and forever.
Questions from the audience, please. As always, I will take the moderator's prerogative. So for maybe one of your first tasks as a company is raising awareness. What, once you've done that, what kind of next steps do you recommend to, and there's different customers here, there's end users and there's technology providers. Could you expand a little bit what people here at Q2B might do to kind of take more of a role and take part in this, in raising awareness and making changes?
I think it's fundamentally important to understand that when you're using your devices, when you're in front of your PC, when you're using your mobile phone, that you are really involved with an exchange and an interaction that's unprotected. You're behind a firewall, sure enough, and you have a whole series of threat detection solutions that are trying to prevent you from being attacked. But if those fail, and we see regularly that they fail, I think there's a very famous WebEx issue that came up a few days ago that created its own issues, you still need to protect that data. And so that's really, when Cyferall was put together, the idea was really to understand all the phases of life of vulnerability of data. Not threat detection, but just real data. And I think there's a serious need for sensibility around those vulnerabilities. Because we talk to a lot of different customers. We're an Intel Gold partner. We've signed with a large Italian telco for proof of concepts with our technology and with banks. But it's amazing how this lack of awareness of that particular issue, how it exists, and how everyone's really focusing on the data in transit and the fact that they think that because it's on a network that it's more vulnerable. And it's true, it was the case, but it's just not the case anymore.